Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jack Daly, the John and Adrian Mars Director of the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, and it's my honor to welcome you here tonight as we commemorate 40 years of inspiring the world and celebrate a new chapter for the world's most popular museum. For kicking us off with a high style tonight, I'd like to thank the United States Air Force Band Ceremonial Brass Quintet. Please give them a round of applause. The Air Force Band serenades here frequently during the summer, so if you watch the schedule, you can hear the entire program among your friends here at the museum. When the museum first opened in July 1st, 1976, President Ford called it a perfect birthday present from the American people to themselves. And we often say that aviation is America's story. But the revolution in the sky sparked by the Wright brothers more than a century ago belongs to the world. The astronauts who saw the Earth from the moon only 66 years after the first flight at Kitty Hawk had a special perspective on the global impact of that first small step. The director who oversaw this museum's construction and stood on these very steps to open the doors 40 years ago was none other than Major General Michael Collins, United States Air Force retired, command module pilot for Apollo 11. Here to tell us more about our early days, I'd like to introduce a short video featuring General Collins.
I came to Washington sneaking up on 1976, and I used to run around town saying, "Museum on the Mall by the Bicentennial." My name is Mike Collins. At one time was in the space program on Project Gemini and Apollo, which you know is the first flight to the moon. Then after that, I was lucky enough to be director of this museum, the National Air and Space Museum. So many of the things that are in it, the artifacts in it, are old friends of mine, and some of them way before my time. We were supposed to open July 4th, 1976, and we actually beat it by 3 days, July 1st, 1976. We were supposed to cut the ribbon out here, the ribbon on the mall side of the building, declaring it open. The signal came from a spacecraft between here and Mars in outer space, and I was holding my breath, you know, I was thinking all those electrons gone lost up there in space, and all these VIPs standing around looking at this ribbon and this mechanical shearing device, and nothing would happen. But believe it or not, all the electrons did their cute little things, and the ribbon got snipped and the building got opened. It was good. At the peak of the Apollo program, when Neil Armstrong stepped out onto the surface of the moon, that, I think, was kind of the peak of the interest that the American public had. Buildings like this do a lot to sustain that level of interest, and that's one of the things that I think is very important about this beautiful surrounding, the National Air and Space Museum, which is a vital part of the Smithsonian Institution.
The museum General Collins built, like the ship he flew to the moon, is a priceless treasure to the people of the world, and I'm honored to follow in his footsteps as director. As he mentioned, there was tension about whether the signal from Mars would come in time to cut the ribbon. Just in case, the President of the United States was on hand with a pair of scissors as a backup. But the Viking performed flawlessly. Just days later, the Viking 1 lander became the first American spacecraft to land on Mars. In 1984, after its mission was complete, NASA formally transferred the ownership of Viking 1 lander to the museum. Of course, we haven't been able to collect it yet, so NASA, working with the Jet Propulsion Lab and the University of Arizona, was kind enough to check in on it for us, and this picture was taken by the high-rise camera aboard the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter to celebrate the museum's 40th birthday. It demonstrates the challenge ahead, and we have unfinished business on Mars, and it's up to the men and women of this museum to inspire the next generation to take up the task. It would be impossible to recognize all the staff and volunteers who have performed the museum's mission over the decades, but we are honored to have 10 of them with us here tonight who have been here as part of the team since the very beginning, 40 years ago. As I call your name, please stand. Phil Edwards. Karen Manis. I'm glad I didn't ask you to hold your applause. This is much better than waiting till the end. Okay, Ted Maxwell. Barbara O'Malley. Bill Rowe. Chris Strain. Mark Taylor. Bob Vanderlinden. Estelle Washington. And Ken Young. Together, they have dedicated more than 400 years to this museum and its hundreds of millions of visitors, and are the perfect representatives of our committed staff, present, past, and future. Please give them a round of applause for their extraordinary service. The National Air and Space Museum is just one part of the Smithsonian Institution. It is the centerpiece, but it's just one part of the Smithsonian Institution, which includes 19 and soon to be 20 museums, 9 research centers, and extensive global outreach activities. We wouldn't be able to fulfill our mission at the Museum without James Smithson's mandate for the increase and diffusion of knowledge, which has guided the Smithsonian for almost 170 years. Our next speaker arrived at the Smithsonian in 1976 for the nation's bicentennial celebration. For many years, he directed the Center for Folk Life and Cultural Heritage. So if you enjoyed the Smithsonian's Folk Life Festival out on the mall today, you have him to thank. Now he oversees all of the institution's museums and research centers, and a list of other centers and programs and activities too numerous to list. It's my great pleasure to introduce the Acting Provost and Undersecretary for Museums and Research, Dr. Richard Curran. Richard?
Thank you, Jack. As General Daly said, I first worked for the Smithsonian. I was young then. I was 25 years old and first worked for the Smithsonian when this museum opened. During that time, we were celebrating the bicentennial of the United States, 200 years of our country. And just remember what it was like then. Now, younger people will not, but those of a certain age will. We were in a space race with the Russians, with the Soviets. There was a Cold War going on. And the whole challenge to go to space, and when President Kennedy, just over here in front of the Capitol at his inauguration, challenged the country to send a man to the moon and back before the end of the decade, that was fresh in our minds. And so when we went to space, and when this museum was built, it was really a monument to our country in terms of our science, technology, and engineering, the kind of innovation that made us great and historically has made us great as a country. But it was even more than that. And if you were here 40 years ago when this museum opened, you recognized at that time, just as those who were old enough to remember when Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon, that this was a victory not only of science and engineering technology, but national unity, national imagination. We were all very much together as Americans at that time and very proud of our national accomplishment. Now, this museum has continued to inspire and, as Jack said, millions and millions, over 350 million people have walked through this museum. They've worn out the carpet many times. But generation after generation has been inspired what they've seen and looked up. And many a child walked through this museum and said, I want to be an astronaut or an astrophysicist, or I want to be a pilot, or I want to be the person that makes these things happen and designs these airplanes and spaceships. And so this has really been an inspirational place for our country, for our citizens, and people around the world who've been here. Now, Jack is Michael Collins' successor, right, down a few steps, who built this museum. And that's something Jack and I shared, because after Mike Collins was the director of this museum, he became the undersecretary of the Smithsonian. And I'm very proud to occupy that office today. And as I often say, Mike Collins had to go to the moon and back to do all this. All I have to do is walk up a flight of stairs. But it makes me ever so proud to be part of this effort, part of the museum, part of the Smithsonian, that really serves all of you, all of us, and people beyond. We take very seriously the idea of our mission of increasing and diffusing knowledge, of inspiring the next generation. It's a great responsibility we share, and tonight we are so, so happy to celebrate this birthday. And you have not only the people here, but we're joined by others who have special birthday greetings.
Happy birthday.
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 Happy 40th birthday.
Happy 40th birthday.
Happy 40th birthday. Thank you for inspiring me and my fellow astronauts.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Congratulations on 40 years of excellence.
Keep inspiring those generations of future space explorers to aim high and reach for the stars.
Congratulations to the National Air and Space Museum on
40 fabulous years.
Happy birthday
To the National Air and Space Museum.
NASA wishes you many more decades of inspiring the next generation to reach higher and explore.
Keep empowering those kids to live their dreams.
Happy birthday, National Air and Space Museum.
Over the last 40 years, we've opened many new galleries and exhibitions, including the state-of-the-art Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center in Chantilly, Virginia. But the heart of the museum has always been our central exhibit space, now called the Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall. More than 327 million people have passed through the doors behind me into one of the world's great public spaces, dedicated to discovery and exploration. As we transform the gallery for the next 300 million visitors, we work to interpret the priceless treasures of human achievement, not merely display them. The new exhibits capture the spark behind the milestone stories and fire the imagination like never before. According to a recent study, the world needs more than 1 million pilots and aviation technicians to meet the global demand over the next 20 years. That kind of growth requires investment on a global scale, and there's no better place to engage the young people of the world than the Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall. I'd like to thank Boeing for supporting our mission and to inspire the millions who will pass through these doors in the years ahead. It's now my great pleasure to welcome Greta Lundberg, the Vice President for Strategy and Advocacy at Boeing. Greta?
Thank you so much. Thank you, General Daly, for your service to our country and for your leadership of this great American institution. I'm Greta Lundberg, Vice President for Strategy and Advocacy at the Boeing Company, and it's honored to be here with you tonight to celebrate the Boeing Milestone of Flight Hall during our centennial year, as well as this museum's 40th anniversary, and also my birthday, so it's a special night for me as well. Thanks. As a mother of a 4-year-old, my daughter talks a lot about what she wants to be when she grows up. Some weeks it's a firefighter, other weeks it's Batman or Wonder Woman. But after countless visits to the Air and Space Museum, all she talks about now is wanting to be an astronaut. While her career options may evolve, I know she'll never lose that fascination with space and science and innovation. And that's a testament to the stories and experiences this place unlocks for its millions of visitors each year. That's the reason that Boeing has supported the National Air and Space Museum for more than 2 decades. We agree with the museum that our goal should be inspiring the next generation of innovators and building on the progress of the last century. Now, this July 15th, 100 years ago, our founder, Bill Boeing, got his start in a little red barn in Seattle, building planes made almost entirely of timber and canvas. Over the past century, the men and women of Boeing have helped build the world's largest aerospace company and shape the course of human history along the way. Just think about the progress that we've made together. Humans went from walking on Earth to walking on the moon, from riding horses to flying jet planes and spacecraft. And while we celebrate the pioneers that built this incredible legacy of American innovation, it's more important than ever for our country to inspire a new generation of leaders to dream, to innovate, to explore, and to inspire. As you make your way through the galleries tonight, I'd ask that you just imagine the artifacts and stories that will narrate our next 100 years, and we look forward to being part of that at Boeing. Thank you all for coming out tonight, and enjoy the museum.
Our next speaker knows how important that first spark can be to set you on a path to great achievement. After her first air show when she was 5 and a notable visit to this museum when she was 12, her path led to the Civil Air Patrol and on to the United States Air Force Academy. From there, she became a respected Air Force officer and decorated combat pilot. By the way, she flew her combat in the F-15E Strike Eagle. I should mention that she also had her husband as a crew member on that. So it was a real family affair on that one. As the first female member of the elite Thunderbird demonstration team, and later as the White House Fellow and Executive Director of Joining Forces, she embodies one of aviation's core lessons. From milestones to moonshots, it takes courage to attempt the things that no one has done before and unshakable confidence to achieve your goals. She's an outstanding role model for any young person who aims high in life, and she's not done yet. It's my great pleasure to introduce Colonel Nicole Malachowski.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you, General Daly, for those gracious words. It's always a joy to be here, sir. And it is an honor, like all of you, to be standing here at this iconic American museum. I think it's a museum that in so many ways embodies everything that is great about our country: freedom, innovation, technology, creativity, and big dreams. And today we're here to trumpet the significance of milestones. The 40th anniversary of this museum is a milestone, all of the milestones over time in aviation and space flight. So it got me thinking about milestones, like why do we celebrate them and why do we mark them as important? And milestones are those events along the arc of history, big ones and small ones, that in this case have transformed aviation and spaceflight in so many ways. And oftentimes it's ways that folks often remark that mankind could never have even imagined. You've heard that statement, that mankind could never even have imagined. But is that really true? Isn't it in fact our imaginations that these milestones, and in our imaginations, these milestones are conceived and ultimately achieved? And over the past 40 years, as the other speakers have noted, this museum has sparked the imagination of countless visitors, young and old alike. And it was this place that sparked my own imagination back in 1986. As a young 12-year-old girl, I walked these halls, spending an entire day, notebook in hand, reading every placard, inspecting every single artifact, and discovering every nook and cranny that is in this building behind me. And I was doing this, and I was imagining my place in this world of aviation. And that visit 30 years ago served as a launching point from my own experiences over the past 20 years wearing our nation's uniform. You see, back in 1986, there weren't a lot of women pilots in the military, and the law prohibited women from flying fighter aircraft. And in fact, in elementary school, I proclaimed to my class, I'm going to be a fighter pilot someday. And as you can imagine, the response at the time was maybe less than enthusiastic. And in fact, a teacher even needled me a little bit and said, quote, maybe you should come back to class when you have something different in mind. So demoralized, I returned home, shed a little tear in front of my parents, wondering aloud in the dramatic way that a young 12-year-old girl would, why couldn't I become a fighter pilot? But that summer, my parents brought me here, to this museum, a place where my imagination could finally run free, unconstrained by people's expectations of me or the status quo. And this place showed me that imagination is all about embracing the art of the possible. My life was transformed here forever. I stood in awe of the Wright Flyer and the Wright brothers' legacy, Charles Lundberg and the spirit of St. Louis. And for the very first time in my life, in a substantive way, I learned about the contributions women had made to aviation and spaceflight. Amelia Earhart, Bessie Coleman, Geraldine Mock, Jackie Cochran, the list goes on. Their stories flooded my imagination with the art of the possible. And then, in the smallest little corner of the museum, I saw them. My heroes to this very day, the women Air Force service pilots of World War II, America's first women military aviators. So the light bulb went off in my 12-year-old head. Over 40 years ago, prior to my visit in 1986, those women flew. They flew in service to their country. And at that moment, I realized I could too. The 12-year-old in me was catalyzed to action. My imagination was unleashed, and it led to 20 years of flying the F-15E and the F-16. And I'm watching this wonderful group of young folks down here in the front, and I think, how many astronauts and how many scientists and engineers, how many pilots are we going to have inspired here today, tonight, in this museum? And so it goes, that arc of history moves on, milestones conceived and achieved by our imagination. This museum reminds us that the world of aviation and spaceflight is open to all of us. Milestones are not an end to themselves. They simply set the bar higher. They show us what the art of the possible looks like, and they serve as a call to action to all of us to achieve those things that we can and we do conceive in our wildest dreams. And that's a wonderful lesson to humanity. And so with that, to the Smithsonian team and General Daly, sir, thank you very much. My heartfelt thanks for letting me be here tonight, for bringing imaginations to life, including my own. And God bless the wonderful men and women and their flying machines.
Can you figure why we had her speak here tonight? Nicole, she's exactly what she was hooked here, and that's exactly what we hope happens to many of these young folks that come through the museum. But thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate the National Air and Space Museum. Of course, tonight is not about the past, it's about the future. The future is of this museum and the future of exploration and discovery on Earth and off of it. For 40 years, we've commemorated the greatest achievements of the 20th century. But now we turn our sights to shaping the 21st century and to passing the torch to the future generations. To that end, I'd like to turn the helm of tonight's program over to one of the museum's youngest team members. The Explainers program, which is sponsored by General Electric Aviation, employs high school and college students to engage visitors of all ages on the scientific principles of aviation and space exploration. They open the doors to discovery for visitors from all over the world, and they're going to do that for us here tonight. Here to launch the new Boeing of Milestones Flight Hall and to introduce the next chapter of the National Air and Space Museum is a junior at American University majoring in physics, and her name is Ray Stewart. Ray, come on up.
Thank you, General Daly. We are moments away from opening the doors and kicking off our All Night at the Museum celebration. We have lots of programs and events all throughout the night and into tomorrow morning, and we hope you can join us for them. Tonight we gather to honor both the legacy and future of this great museum. Places like the National Air and Space Museum have the profound ability to draw out awe and wonder and plant seeds of curiosity. In my own life, it was museums like this one that ignited my love for science. I'm here in Washington, D.C. to study physics and thankfully have the incredible opportunity to be an explainer here at the museum. Explainers get to best see the true value of these artifacts. As we tell the stories behind the inventions, innovations, and scientific discoveries within these walls, we witness the past collide with the future with every smile, every wide-eyed look, and every moment of true understanding. So many people who have come through these doors leave touched and inspired by what they have seen, and these experiences act as seeds for further innovation and discovery. I am so proud of this museum, and I'm so blessed by the way it has touched not only my own life, but also the lives of millions of other people. So, happy birthday, National Air and Space Museum. We are T-minus 47 seconds from opening the doors and launching our brand new Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall. And the explainers here are going to open the doors and begin the all night at the museum. But before we do that, we have one last birthday message. So go ahead and take a look.
Hello, I'm Expedition 48 Commander Jeff Williams of NASA, flying 250 miles above the Earth aboard the International Space Station. My crewmates and I wanted to take a moment to wish the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum a happy 40th birthday. Your magnificent museum has inspired millions over the past 4 decades in commemorating the spirit of exploration and the achievements of human flight. With that, and to start a new era for the museum, please begin your countdown for the reopening of the Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Blast off.
Welcome to the National Air and Space Museum and to our new Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall. I am one of the curators of this new space. My name is Margaret Whitekamp. I'm a curator here in space history, and we are waiting just in a minute. My colleague Bob Vanderlinden will be joining me, who is my co-curator and who has been here since 1976. But we are delighted to welcome you to this new space that really asks people to think about the ways that aviation and spaceflight have transformed the world. Every day we live in a world that is shaped by aviation and spaceflight in ways that we don't even think about anymore. From the coffee that you drink in the morning and the bananas that are on your table that have come to you courtesy of jet aviation, to the weather that you track and the way that you use your GPS to get to your job, which come to you because of satellites, which really only began with the Sputnik in 1957. So we are asking people to think about the science and technology, but also the people, the politics and the power, the business and economics, and the culture that is shaped by aviation and space technologies. Behind us, you see people coming into the new Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall, and I would love to take you on a brief tour to show you a little bit of what we have. You'll see behind me, most notably, hanging above me is the Spirit of St. Louis, the actual airplane that was flown by Charles Lundberg beginning in 1927 when he won the Orteig Prize. The museum, actually the Smithsonian, sent a telegram to Lundberg when he was arriving in Paris, asking him whether the Smithsonian could have this historic aircraft. And when he landed, he agreed, after he had flown it some more, that he would bring it back to us. That aircraft was actually lowered to the floor, worked on by the museum's conservators, and then raised back up into its current position. You'll see that below it we have one of the icons of spaceflight, of human spaceflight, the Apollo lunar module. It is both a real lunar module, but it is not a flown lunar module. Those are on the moon. This is LM2, a real lunar module that was built for orbital tests, and the actual orbital test with LM1, with the first lunar module, went so well that they eventually used this one not for orbital tests in space where it would have been lost, but for drop tests, and then it went to the World Expo in Osaka, Japan, before it came to the National Air and Space Museum. So this is a real lunar module that has been painstakingly reproduced and refurbished so that it looks like LM5 Eagle, which landed on the moon. So this is part of the system that brought human beings to the moon and back in 1969 through to 1962. So it's a little hard to make out behind me, but above me on the other side of the gallery, we have the X-15, which is an airplane that could go as fast as Mach 6, an experimental program run by NASA and the United States Air Force, looking at just how fast you could go in air and in space. The pilots for that X-15 could actually earn astronaut wings for those flights. And in fact, the one that is hanging in this gallery was flown by Neil Armstrong. And in 2008, when Neil Armstrong came to the museum and did a lecture about some of his work, he actually asked us if he, instead of talking about going to the moon, which he had spoken about so often, he actually talked about his X-15 work. As an engineer, he was extraordinarily proud of that. When you come into this gallery, you'll see that it has been reorganized. You'll see actually that our visitors walking through this are walking right up through the middle of the gallery where there used to be artifacts in different places. And it now has the artifacts kind of off to each side, which allows us really to bring over 7 million visitors a year through this space. We're one of the most visited museums in the world. And so being able to have things arrayed to the side not only allows us to have a better flow and a better experience for our visitors, but it also allows us a little more space to tell people about what they're seeing. I think it's important to remember that when this building opened in 1976, the Apollo missions had just finished in 1972. They were current events. And in fact, even the Spirit of St. Louis, which had flown in 1927, was only about 50 years old. That's the equivalent of remembering something from 1965 or 1966. So when people came into this building during that bicentennial year, they were looking at things that many of the visitors would have recognized and would not have had to have explained to them. Now we have visitors who are coming through who have grown up in a world that is shaped by aviation and space flight. And we need to give them a little more of a sense of what the world might have looked like before that, or where those technologies came from. And so this is a place now where we can talk not only about the Cold War context of the space race, but also to show the two missiles that are on the side of the hall and that are part of showing in demonstration, per the terms of a treaty from 1987, an entire class of nuclear weapons that were eliminated by a treaty signed by President Ronald Reagan and Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev in 1987. So this is a place where we can tell a more detailed story, where we can show off these artifacts, and we have both this beautiful multi-story space that houses these iconic pieces of spaceflight and aviation technology, but then also on the other side of the gallery behind me, you can really see that we have this one-story space that allows us to have a more intimate experience. There you will find the studio model of the original Star Trek Starship Enterprise used to film the 1960s television show. And you'll also find some unique pieces that you might not think of. Trophies awarded for aviation and spaceflight, and also a set of pottery and porcelain displaying hot air balloons that come from the 1780s, from the very beginnings of flight at all. So being able to tell that cultural story through the Enterprise, through the Balloonomania memorabilia from the late 18th century, really allows us to tell a story of the many ways that aviation and spaceflight have shaped people's daily lives every day in all kinds of very big ways that have to do with politics and communication, but also that are very much about people's day-to-day lives. These are things that have made our universe larger and our world smaller. And we are delighted to be able to bring them to you today.